Hey there, Hetty here. Thought I'd take a little break from writing what I was going to talk about next in order to comment on what I think was a really fantastic video and an important concept, and also to bring you a tarot spread. So this concept is one related to tarot, or frankly, divination itself, and the issue was addressed by Tom Benjamin on his channel. The video is called "This Tiny Tarot Tip Could Save You Frustration and Make Readings More Accurate." He posted it about a month ago, but I'm only watching it today because I have time now. And really, fundamentally, the tip is this: have rules. Before you shuffle the cards, before you deal, know how you're going to read the cards, know how you're going to interact with them. And I think that this is wonderful advice and really very crucial. And it applies to more than just tarot or cartomancy. It is a thing you can apply to scrying, to throwing lots, to the evaluation of symbolic references in your surroundings. And in fact, it is kind of closely related to the concept of opting into symbolism, that is, opting into constraint. Now, this may sound inherently limiting, but I don't think it is. I think that it can actually be freeing and expansive. And all this talk about intuitive reading, it's easy to forget that structure has its own potency, that by setting limits, you can also build upon them as if they are a scaffold, so that you can apply your intuition to the more specific and often more pertinent details, rather than relying on it in order to navigate the most basic and fundamental levels of the question you're asking. I agree too with Tom's mention of it doesn't really matter what the specific rules are that you're using, what structure you apply beforehand and through your reading. It is enough to have one in order to get much more out of that reading. By defining the boundaries of what we consider, we are freer in our interpretations and our manipulation of concepts within those boundaries. And because the specific rule set doesn't matter, those boundaries can be changed from reading to reading, or even within a reading, if you again set rules regarding when you will change those boundaries. It is perfectly valid to be operating within a reading using reversals, being defined as the opposite of whatever the upright is, let's say, and then coming to a point where you need a yes-no answer to a question, at which point you can mentally state that reversals now denote no, uprights denote yes, and you can shuffle and move on from there. Which means that in addition to studying different interpretations of the cards, we probably all benefit also from spending some time brainstorming about how to construct rule sets that are functional and useful in readings. Much in the way one would design a board game and then beta test it to make sure that it doesn't always lead to the same end result, the rule sets we apply to our interactions with the cards can be optimized over time and with experience. A spiritually focused reading versus a mundane focused reading may have, and possibly should have, different rules and laws by which they operate. Because the issues and the questions and the challenges and ambiguities inherent in those different kinds of readings call for different sets of structures, different scaffolds, in order to keep them stable as we reach upward for enlightenment and insight. Now, for my part, a lot of my reading for myself is heavily centered on spiritual questions, on opportunities for study, crossroads and development, that sort of thing. When I read for friends, it's often much more practical. Things like determining the best approach to goal setting or navigating difficult professional questions. And although I can't recall ever expressly stating that I use a different rule set when I'm working with others versus on my own spiritual stuff, it's something that sort of emerged quite naturally. It's also something that depends on what decks I'm using at the time, because I have a few. although by no means the mind-bending number that avid collectors possess. But I have a handful of decks, and one of them is expressly suited for not having fixed reversed meanings. This is my, quote, homemade deck, quote, which isn't really homemade so much as it's home modified and allows me to write on and erase ideas, concepts, significance, etc. So just to provide an example of how rules can be used to structure readings and improve one's capacity to interpret the cards meaningfully, when I do use reversals, here's one way I often structure my interpretation of different sorts of cards. So for instance, the majors are pretty much always conceptual to me, and reversals versus upright denote external focus for upright, internal focus for reversal. The court cards for me are usually archetypal concepts. So like the upstart, the messenger, the guide, the controller, with reversals denoting the aspect in shadow. Aces I treat differently than the 2 through 10s. For me, aces are fundamentally the unstructured, raw, elemental essence or power, either emergent, upright, or suppressed. And when I'm really getting into it, one really interesting way for me to interpret 2s through 10s is to look at their reversals as denoting a wrong question or missing the mark somehow, with a hint as to why being the upright meaning, which means that rather than being able to lay out all of the cards in a spread at once, when I'm using this kind of definitional structure, I sort of have to shuffle and draw as I go, because at any point I may hit a not really on the mark here, try again. And based on what card is reversed, I can adjust that question and then see what kind of response I get as a result. Anyways, I wanted to throw that out there. I think it's a very worthwhile concept to explore. And like I said, it can be done with any system. And I would argue the less structured the divinatory tool, that is, the more open-ended, the greater the potential of that tool to provide any kind of answer, the more it benefits from imposed structure. Since we're here, I'm going to throw this little alchemical spread at you, which is a layout that I designed in order to touch base with a transformational process, and which was, of course, inspired by the 7 alchemical operations. Now, although there are 7 operations, the spread actually has 10 cards, because some of those operations have been split. So I'll just walk you through the positions in order to give you a sense of what this layout tries to get at. Note that I don't have time to dig into the alchemical information here. So if you're not familiar with alchemy at all, you don't really need to be in order to throw this spread, but it might be worthwhile to read up on it just a little bit to get a sense, since I am going to leave you hanging here. So the first 2 cards in this spread both reference calcination. The first card representing the dross to be burnt away, the dross being burnt away. And the second card representing the essence that is revealed by that process. A fundamental energy or aspect, the seed of that thing within. The third card represents dissolution. And within this layout, this card represents how what's going on in your unconscious modifies or is coloring the essence that was revealed in position 2. So it's really a modifying card and gives you a sense of how that energy, even if it isn't immediately apparent within you or in your life, or in how it influences your life, this unconscious modifying card can perhaps help you account for why that is. It can give you an idea of what that energy looks like once it's passed through the hands of an unconscious that is shaping it, reshaping it, before delivering it to your conscious mind or manifesting it in your life. The fourth card represents separation, the untangling of that purer aspect from the impurities and suppressive elements that should be discarded. The fifth card represents conjunction, the state of balance that is manifest after separation is achieved and once the fundamental nature and one's unconscious and everything at play within it are synced and addressed. Cards 6 and 7 both fall under the operation of fermentation, and in a break with classical alchemical progression, and this spread touch on basically a different set of aspects. In this case, the first card represents a familiar trait or process, a skill or aspect you know well that has become quite fundamental, something old hat. Whereas the seventh card represents the process by which that familiar aspect, trait, skill, what have you, is actually transformed into something new and even more potent. A thing that is represented by card number 8, the card in the position of distillation, which is the novel emergent skill, facet, produced by that process of fermentation. And finally, positions 9 and 10 are both about coagulation. The first card representing how one should go about reincorporating these aspects and skills that have emerged from the reading thus far into a whole, how to make use of them, how to embody them, and maintain their presence in your life. And the 10th card is essentially the metamorphosis complete, what the truer, purer, more unified self looks like at the end of this journey, and as you stand at the next fork in the road that inevitably will follow. Anyway, hope you've had fun. Give the spread a try, and if you do, let me know how it goes. And get thee over to Tom's channel if you haven't watched that video. I'll talk to you again soon. Until next time, enjoy this glorious day.